So I'm back after a brief break, thanks to Fiber Festival, and then warping my loom for my Pucker Up scarf from Valley Yarns, in other words, webs. Uh, and I've learned a couple of things from setting up the loom last weekend for this deflected double weave shawl. Deflected double weave is a really, really interesting weave structure because there's a lot of open space. There are really, really big floats. And then after you take it off the loom and the yarn relaxes and you wash it in hot water, the wool-based yarn, and let me try and zoom in a little bit closer here. The wool-based yarn, which is the Zephyr yarn, the light blue, and then the you can see it here. It's the very, very not shiny, or much less shiny than the Tencel. The wool and silk yarn is going to shrink up, and it's going to create these really intense puckers. In fact, I don't mind showing you what the cover photo looks like, even though it's in black and white, just to give you a sense of how the fabric's going to look in the end. So I admit that I have been nervous about putting this deflected double weave warp on the loom. I was just nervous about it. And then I screwed up and used up all my warp yarn and went ahead and did the origami cardi. So it's been ages, months maybe, since I wound my warp chains. And the first lesson I learned from coming back to this project after a long time away is don't let your warp chains sit for a long time. So this time around, unlike with the lighter blue colorway, I did not forget an entire 16 thread section of the stripe sequence, but I did skip one of my, in one place, I skipped my 2 warp ends in gray that encircle these narrow bands of alternating light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, and that was a real problem. So because I got to I was threading and I went, wait a minute, where are those warp ends? And then I cut 2 more warp ends, and then I realized, oh, I did wind them. They're just in a different place on the chain, and I had planned when I made the chain to go back and do it later, but I'd just completely forgotten about it. So lesson number 1 is try not to leave your warp chains sitting for forever, because if you've made corrections on the fly like I did, you are going to run into trouble. Or you might run into trouble. Maybe you're just better at this than I am. The second thing I noticed when I warped the loom is I messed up. Ideally, you want your warp threads coming from the back of the loom to the front of the loom in as straight a line as possible. And I think you can see here that I've got these kind of big gobbets of unthreaded heddles in. And this is partly because I just didn't think about it, and I should have. So on shacked looms, there are heddle hooks on the 26-inch Baby Wolf, the 36-inch Mighty Wolf, the 36-inch Standard, and then there's 2 sets of heddle hooks on the 45-inch loom. And I would have been smarter to sort of, and you kind of have to plan. And one of the really, for me, often annoying things is, okay, you see these little holes in the top of the harness? That's the middle of the harness, because that is where the pin goes to connect it to the lambs. And the heddle hooks, the heddle bar hooks, are of necessity off center from that. So what this means when you're warping a project is you kind of have to anticipate how many heddles you're going to need. If you thread from right to left, like I did on this one, I needed to anticipate how many heddles I would need before I hit that off-center line, and then needed to start threading on the other side. So if I'm threading from left to right, I'm putting a bunch of heddles over here, waiting to be used. And then I'm starting to thread over here, and then I'm just pushing stuff and pushing stuff and pushing stuff. And I didn't count, and I could have counted, because this pattern very cleverly put in the number of petals you need on each shaft of your loom. So I could have anticipated this better and not had these gobbets of unused petals sitting in the middle. Because ultimately, the further I weave, the more like the more these warp threads over here are going to be pushed out of their straight line going to the back of the loom. And since this is a stretchy, sticky warp, it is the very shiny stuff is tencel, which requires advancing the warp often. Okay, let me try that again with stuff in frame. This very shiny yarn is tencel, which needs to be advanced often so it doesn't abrade on the heddles and the reed and fall apart. And then the tencel is in all these mixed color areas. It's the light blue tencel and the dark blue tencel, and then the solid dark blue, or the solid dark blue stripes and the gray are wool and silk, which makes for a sticky warp. So what I should have done when I noticed this problem with my bunches of heddles is take it out and just rethread this section, but I didn't. And probably when this comes back to bite me in the butt, I promise to report back and say, yeah, I should have taken that out. But it's warped now, and you can see that I've been weaving along here, and I do have floating selvages, which the pattern recommends, but I think should require, because part of the reason this fabric is so much narrower in the reed than my plain weave, I'm reasonably certain, I didn't write down the set of my Origami Cardi fabric, but I'm pretty sure I didn't change the set. So it is as I look here on my thingamabobby, it's a 30 ends per inch set, but look how much narrower it is. And that is largely just because of the weave structure. Deflected double weave pulls in a lot, and because it pulls in, just the nature of this weave structure, you're always going to do better having floating selvages. And since the whole point of floating selvages is to keep your fabric, your weft yarn, from pulling in and making the woven fabric bow in or flare out, I waited. So I'm one of the people who, and you will hear many different opinions on this, when I do floating selvages, I wind them in with my warp. Many people do not, many weavers do not. I have not had the great, well, for various reasons, I just haven't tried it. So what I did do this time to make sure that my floating selvages were going to have some heft to them and not be pulled in just by the force of my weft, is I added loom weights to salvage or warp weights to each of my floating selvages in hopes that, and this has worked really well. It's put just enough tension on these floating selvages. Sorry, let me adjust the camera. Okay, here we go. It's put just enough tension on these floating selvages that they're resisting the pull of the weft as I weave. So this part has gone really well. Let's take a closer look at the part that I've woven, and then I'll do another video showing you what I'm actually doing with multiple shuttles and multiple colors. Okay, so now you can see this stripe of blue is just the light blue tencel, and I only put it in here as a weft protector. You can also see that I've got a cut-off piece of the corrugated cardboard I usually use as a warp separator, just sitting here. This separates my sample where I practiced this weave structure. This separates my sample from the actual shawl, and it's 12 inches wide so that I've got enough left for fringe. I will be insanely grateful when I get past the point where I can take this out, and I'm almost there now. In fact, probably the next time I advance my warp, I'm going to take this out, because the problem with having a spacer that's this wide is I keep catching my shuttle on it. I keep catching my weft thread on it. So the next time I advance my warp, which is going to be really soon, I'm just going to take it out because I don't need it anymore. I've woven enough that I'm not going to push the whole project further down on the warp lengths. So let's look really closely at what this weave structure looks like, because it's kind of freaking amazing. So you see big patches of floats. In other words, this is kind of reminding me of the hashtag scarf I did a few months ago for my sister-in-law. You see big areas of floats, and then you see patches of what looks like plain weave. And as I mentioned earlier, when this comes off the loom and it gets washed, what's supposed to happen is stuff puckers and shrinks and forms curves, almost circles. And deflected double weave is kind of one of the only ways you can get rounded, curved shapes in weaving, because as we know, looms are all about, here's a perpendicular line, or here's a straight line coming down on the warp, and here's the weft going across in a very perpendicular fashion. So this is the beginning of my deflected double weave pucker up scarf, and in the next video I'll show you what it looks like to actually weave on it.